Hi, and today I'm going to be talking, possibly at length, this could go on for a bit, about artifact power again. It's been an issue that keeps cropping up and has seemed to do so more recently. Of course, they put in changes to artifact power, the two bones of contention, I think, really with Legion have been artifact power and legendaries. And although I'm going to be critical in this one, it's not going to be a complete no holds barred because in actual fact, I sort of understand why some of the things that have been done by Blizzard, and a lot of the criticisms of the system have effectively been ones that affect raiders very badly. And in fact, there was a case in point. I was going to do a bit of a video just about this, but I think I'll just really incorporate into this because it's all about the same thing. When there have been a number of guilds disappear, basically disband. This happens all the time. It's not uncommon. I remember exactly the same discussions happening during Warlords of Draenor. People say, oh, guilds are disbanding, and I would say myself, well, this sort of thing happens. Even very notable guilds, you can have guilds that have been going for 10 years and will disband. It doesn't necessarily mean there's anything inherently wrong with the game. It's just run its course. Maybe it just had a very small number of people who were managing it, and they need to go off and do real life things. Any number of reasons. But Consequence, which is what you might call a very efficient guild without being necessarily one that's raiding all the time, or traditionally speaking, disbanded a few weeks ago. And a notable person, Discipline Priest, Proper Bird on YouTube, you've seen her. She, I would say, did. Very good guys. I first came across these. I think maybe it's when she started as well in Hellfire Citadel. They were very, very good boss guides. And she's stopping raiding completely. She's not just going to leave the guild and find somewhere else. The guild is disbanded. The guild's no longer raiding. But she actually talks about it. And you can actually see her video on why she did it. I'll link it in the description below, of course. And there's a number of things she says in there that I agree with. And there's a number of things that I don't agree with. I'm not just going to go through that because I want to bring it back to the artifact power. But one thing that she made very, very clear is there's two main problems with artifact power. Now, I'm going to counterpoint that with the two main issues that Blizzard seem to think there are with it. But, first of all, the two main issues for raiders, certainly, with artifact power is, first of all, it's something you have to spend a lot of time getting outside of raids. Now, it was always understood that raiders really should be doing some stuff outside of raids. A start of expansion, of course you are, because your gear comes from content that is very accessible to a lot of people. You're not just turning up to raids, getting your gear and logging off again. But at other times as well, there's always something you can do to try and improve it a bit, but it doesn't take that much time. I always actually say, people think, raiding, oh, it takes so much time, I haven't got the time to raid. The actual amount of time that we actually need to spend raiding is not much. It's far less than a lot of people spend watching television. The same is not necessarily true of Legion. In Legion, we've come to a real problem. And especially with Nighthold. There's a couple of problems, I'll say, and one particular problem has not manifested itself up to now. And that is the fact that we've got a situation in the last couple of weeks, you would think, in a lot of mythic guilds, ours was no exception, we expected people to have a maxed out artifact. 54 points in their artifact. And some guilds will have insisted on that, and their raiders will have done that. Ours, we didn't. There's a lot of people who didn't have it at 54. There's still some who haven't now. And the reason for that is you have to spend quite a lot of time outside raids doing it. And especially in a guild such as ours, it's a 3-day guild. And the sort of people who play and raid in a 3-day guild don't want World of Warcraft to be their life. So it's actually a bind on them. It's a chore to have to do this artifact power grind. The same was not so much the case before Nighthold, and the reason for that was if you had someone who was doing lots more artifact power grinding than you were, they would only be a little bit ahead because of the exponential curve, because we were still getting artifact knowledge levels, which an artifact knowledge acted as and was intended to act as a catch-up mechanic, and it did that. So it meant that the people who were streaming ahead and doing loads and loads of stuff, working really hard, were very imperceptibly ahead. Well, it wasn't imperceptibly ahead, but it was very slightly ahead. There were a few points ahead. Whereas by the time artifact knowledge got to the 25 cap, by the time the people who started playing from the start had got that artifact knowledge 25, there were people already at 54 at that point, and other people, I mean, myself included, who were a long way behind. A long way behind. And then the catch-up stopped because we reached that limit of artifact knowledge. And of course, there has to be a cap of artifact knowledge. We understand that. But then at that point, it stopped. There was no catch-up mechanic anymore. And then it sort of highlighted, and it really lent on you, oh my God, you actually have to do a lot to be able to catch up. And a lot of raiders have not liked that. In fact, Proper Bird herself was describing the fact that, and remember, this is not a daytime raiding guild. This is a guild for people who have jobs and other lives and things like that. Yes, they are very serious about it, or they were very serious about it, and they got the rewards from that. They got very high world ranks for such a guild. But it was still a hobby. It's a guild where you could play the game as a hobby. And she describes logging off one night thinking, oh, nice early night. Finished earlier than expected. Nice early night. And then commented that it was like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I can't remember exactly when. And that's when it hit her. It's like, oh my God, I'm spending so much time on this game. No time to eat properly, no time to cook food properly, or anything like that. And that's the point at which you think, and that did not apply before Legion. Now, here's where I'm going to sort of support Blizzard to a certain level. That's what it does to raiders. That's how bad it is for raiders. For everyone else, you've got to think of it this way. In Warlords of Draenor, there was nothing to do outside of raiding. I was actually delighted with it, because for me, all World of Warcraft is the raiding. There are sometimes other aspects of the content I enjoy. But ultimately, if it weren't for the good quality raiding, I wouldn't play this game. The rest of the stuff is inferior to some other MMOs for me personally. And some people, I know some, because I've said this before, and some people have said, oh, well, what about this MMO? That's good, got a good end game, stuff like that. It's not for me. Again, it's personal. It's an opinion. For me, World of Warcraft end game, the raiding is top notch, and I've never seen anything that looks as if it could even challenge it for me. So, but then the other players, the casual players, they needed something. There was nothing to do. There was absolutely nothing to do. So Blizzard had to make sure that no one could ever say, I've done everything. Because all you could really do was do some weekly stuff. There was some weekly chores to do. Well, that's not fun. I mean, that's what it is. I've used the word chores. That's what it felt like. So they needed to make sure there was a reason to log on every day. And as they noted, it's because you think to yourself, well, have an artifact power cap each week. So you do so many dungeons and then you're done. And they're sort of moving on, not quite to a cap, but a way to encourage you to do that in 7.2. But their argument, and it's a compelling argument, is that's no good, because then what will happen is the serious players will do it at the start of the week, and then the more casual players who need to get it towards the end of the week, but before the next reset, Sunday, Monday at the time, Tuesday in Europe, because we don't reset till Wednesday, will be sort of stuck trying to find groups and not being able to find groups. So they needed to make sure there was a reason all times of the week for people to do it. And you can't really argue with that logic. But the effect is that it's seen as a grind, and it's not seen as a positive thing, this AP grind. And that's one problem. The second problem, which was also highlighted by Proper Bird and hits her quite badly, is the fact that although, again, to begin with, if you wanted to spread your artifact power across 2 or even 3, but it's probably better 2 artifact weapons, you would never be very far behind on any of them by doing that. But again, there came a point at which you would, because you're asking people to get twice as much artifact power to keep up with 2 weapons. As soon as that artifact knowledge train stopped, it just became more obvious that you are very far behind. So God help anyone who was playing a spec that was very, very strong at the start of the expansion and then was superseded by another. And Blizzard actually said, and they did not follow through with this, in my opinion, they actually said, if there's a spec that looks like it's the strongest spec by some distance, yes, they're going to balance it, but they will still make sure that that's the strongest spec, even if it's only a little bit. That's not, and they use the example of, fire mages are too strong, which at the start they were. Then we'll tune them down to bring it more in line, but it will still be the better spec to take for that content. That's not happening. I'm not just talking about majors here. But in general, that has not happened. If you were to ask some, especially pure DPS classes, they are the hardest hit because there's potentially 3 DPS weapon artifacts that they need to build up if they want to be able to swap around them. And it was always the case with pure DPS classes that you would want several weapons and bits of gear to be able to switch between your DPS specs. But I mean, this is so much worse. I mean, that hasn't gone away, but this is much worse. And it has caused some people who've put a lot of effort and a lot of time into a spec and then suddenly finding that actually it's not so strong now. And Blizzard could come out with the argument that it's only a little bit, it's only like a small difference really. It doesn't cut any ice with players in guilds where small difference like that is the difference between wiping and killing a boss. Because that then means that actually there's maybe someone better we should put into the raid instead of you. So it's doubly harsh for people who have multiple artifact weapons for the same role. So pure DPS class is the obvious example, and in Popper Bird's case, of course, priests, healing priests have 2 as well. That's the only other sort of role where a class has access to 2 specs there. And, you know, and that itself is also a failure. So on the one hand, I understand that Blizzard needed some content to get us playing, to more specifically allow more casual people to always have something to do. But they need to focus more, and I'm not saying it's easy. I mean, this is why I'm not going to be too critical, because I always say you shouldn't really criticise someone unless you've got a better idea. And I'm going to be honest, I've seen various people say various things, but I haven't seen anyone that say anything that would, first of all, stick to their primary requirement that everyone has something that they can do, but on the other hand, don't have to do, and no one's going to get into any shit, and no one's going to be made to feel bad in a serious raiding guild if they don't do it. Now 7.2, when that comes out, they've already said the emphasis is going to be more on doing higher level keystones rather than lower ones and just doing lots of them because of the artifact power bonus you're going to get from the weekly cash. But more on that nearer the time when I think that's fleshed out a bit. So in terms of what Blizzard said, now, so it's already gone for a certain amount of time. So Blizzard posted something. I'm going to put their post down below as well. This is from Watcher, Ian Hazakostas, the game director. So what they've said is, from the outset, Artifact Power was intended to serve 2 intertwined purposes. First, it offered max level progression that was not entirely item driven, along with choices and elements of character customization as players traverse their trait trees. Now, first things first, I don't agree with that. I'm not going to say that I don't think they agree with it and it's a basic lie, but I certainly don't agree with it. I mean, if we look at these couple of things, max level progression that was not entirely item driven, it's very item driven. It's an item, it's your weapon. It's the one item you're going to have through the entire expansion. And it says, along with choices and elements of character customization, there's no choice because you get them all. You get them all. The only choice as such is in which order you get the traits, but everyone knows that's not a choice either. What are people going to do when they're trying to decide which path to take? What are they going to do? They're going to look up a guide, aren't they? That's why I did a guide. Because there's an optimal path to take. That's why you see on wherever you'll see guides on these classes and specs, there's an optimal path. I mean, mine was slightly different because I gave you 4 choices, but I said in each case, under which circumstances each of the 4 paths I gave was correct, but there was one overall path that, let's be honest, was the right one to take. I just gave a few other options if it wasn't palatable. So yeah, I completely disagree with that one. And they said, second, it was meant to serve as a universally desired, consistent reward from all types of content. Now on here, there are stronger ground. Now I would say the purpose of it was to keep people from saying there's nothing to do in the game. Now, because it was never true in Wars of Draenor, there was always something to do. I mean, you know, if you think about what we have now, what do we actually have that's new? We have World Quest, and that's a good addition. I like that. But in terms of other things, you know, we had dungeons before, dungeons that you can queue up for. We had challenge mode, which has now been, superseded by Mythic Plus, which is a better system, and it's a much more fun system. But nonetheless, we had the precursor to it, challenge modes. You had raids. All the sort of stuff was there before. It's just that there was no reason to do it. And that was the key thing. So they knew they needed a reason to do it. So that's the real reason. This thing about universally desired consistent reward is fine. But because I mean, a good thing about it is it means you don't have to do content you don't want to do. I don't like doing PvP, so I don't. Even though that was a good source of artifact power as well. But I didn't like doing it, so I didn't do it. And I didn't have to do it as well. Because I know some people in my guild who did do a fair amount of that, and they didn't get their artifact to 54 before I did, say. Or some of them didn't. So, you know, you choose your content. I, for example, didn't do a lot of Mythic Plus dungeons for it. Everyone thinks, well, Mythic Plus dungeons, that's the way to go. And yes, sure, it was if you wanted to get there first. It was a very efficient way to do it. But it's not the only way to do it. There are other ways to do it as well. And I picked and chose. So from that element, it was sort of true. But the one type of content from which it wasn't very rewarding was, of course, raids. Because you sometimes, from a boss, got a token. And a lot of the time, you didn't. I mean, I could do an Emerald Nightmare clear and get 2 tokens. That's 2 out of 7 bosses. Now, that's rubbish for the premier content. And let's face it, who is it that really needs, I don't mean wants, everyone wants, you know, their characters to be as strong as possible, of course. It is a game that, at end game, what is the whole purpose of the game? It is to make your character stronger. That's where all the rewards lie. But the people who really need it up there, the people who are going to notice it most, are raiders. And then to say from that premier raiding content that you're going to get fewer rewards, a full night of raiding, of farm raiding. I don't mean progress. Obviously, you're not killing bosses. You're not going to get anything. But a farm, you could do a full night. You could do Emerald Nightmare, Mythic Clear, and get not just less artifact power than if you'd spent the same amount of time doing Mythic Plus dungeons, but way less. You wouldn't even get a fraction of it. I mean, that was just pathetic. So they have sort of changed it a little bit now. They changed it so that all the bosses in Nighthold will guaranteed drop you a token. Now, from my point of view, that should have been in from the start. Had it been in from the start as well, I'm going to say that not only would it have just made more sense, but we wouldn't have had the situation now where raiders felt that they had to be doing lots and lots of content outside of raids to get their artifact power up. Because all those people I say that still haven't got artifact 54 or got it but, you know, not quite in time or not as soon as we would have liked, would have got it sooner had bosses always dropped artifact power. And it would have, so you'd have been able to have, to my mind, the best of both worlds, sort of. I'm not saying there wouldn't be any problems, because the people who are not doing a lot of that wouldn't obviously get as much from raiding, so they would still, you know, still have a reason to run things to get their artifact power up. Raiders would have got it up much sooner, which meant that the, you know, the impetus to get more and more artifact power content done outside of raids wouldn't have been there because they wouldn't have needed it as much. Apart from, as I say, the poor sods who've got loads of artifacts. It wouldn't solve that problem. It wouldn't ease it a little. It wouldn't solve it. But it would at least solve the first. So, and I still think it's a little bit petty that they're only doing it to Nighthold bosses and not all raids. Someone was telling me that, I think it was Preach had said, I don't know, I didn't watch that video myself, but someone was telling me that someone, anyway, a YouTuber, had been describing it as if it was guaranteed to drop off all bosses, but it's not. I don't know whether they're up to it or not. I mean, I did an Emerald Nightmare run this weekend. Can't remember if it was Friday or Saturday now. I didn't get one off every boss. But Nighthold I am now. I am getting them off every boss. And it's a lot of artifact power. And that would have been great from the start of Emerald Nightmare. Just, you know, do a raid boss, get a token. Fantastic. And they should have done that. And they should still do it now. It seems a little petty to me to only apply it to Nighthold. Because there are some people, like I'm recruiting them, I'm trying to recruit some people, and I'm looking at some people, I'm looking at their artifact power weapon, and weapon power even, and just some of them just too far behind. And you look at the logs, obviously, just to see, well, you know, are they some sort of Superman who can still do really good output, even though their artifact level is like 20 points behind, 15 points behind? And the answer is no, they can't. So there's a load of people who actually might be quite good raiders. They just don't feel that they should have to spend the time outside of raids doing other stuff, and therefore don't. And I'm passing them over because even though I'm quite keen to recruit a few people, they're just not going to cut it. They just don't have the output, no matter how well they play. So, and that's backed up by their logs. And you know, that should stop. You know, these people, I mean, they've made a mistake. They should just own up to. I mean, they are own up to some mistakes, but they should own up to that one and not be petty about it and just make it for all raids. I don't see why they just make it for Nighthold. So, what are Blizzard actually going to do about this? So, what they've said in their post, which again is linked down below, is in 7.2 in a PTR coming up, we should notice a few things. First of all, they understand that the problems arose once artifact knowledge stopped rising up. And they've said that, you know, it's sort of flattened out when you're doing the latter ranks. So what they've said is they're going to keep it exponential. So that way, because they've acknowledged now that if you're now in the situation we're in now, someone spending twice as long will get twice as many points, and that was never the intention. So they're going to keep it exponential, so that won't ever be the case. They'll always be ahead of you on the curve if they're spending a lot longer than you, but it'll never be miles ahead, if you see what I mean. They'll be doing a lot of extra work for small gains. Now, that in itself would be a good thing, and you think, well, that's harsh on the people who are going to put a lot of work and time into it. But at the same time, you could argue, well, it's also going to disincentivize you doing that. It's going to mean, well, you'll be asking yourself, well, is it really worth it? And if the answer is no, then actually Blizzard will have cracked it. The other thing they've said and they've talked about is adjusting the amount of artifact power you get from dungeons. So they've acknowledged that there's a problem at the moment. There's some dungeons that are really quick and easy to run to get a lot of artifact power, more souls. And there are some where it takes a long time to get exactly the same. So Halls of Valor, for example. So they're going to retune it so the longer ones give you more artifact power and the shorter ones give you less. And also you get this big hefty one in your mythic cache each week, which is based upon the highest level dungeon you did of whatever type. And I think the intention here is, they seem to be implying it, I wish they would overtly state it, maybe they haven't, I'm just reading too much into it. But the intention, I guess, is that you are disincentivized from doing lots of dungeon runs because it's actually not a time efficient way of getting artifact power. I mean, and this could well be true. If, for example, you're going to get a decent amount from raids and you're going to get if you do a high level key, so you don't have to do a few dungeons a week to push yourself up to a really high level, and that returns you a load of artifact power in your weekly cache, and you do a few others to get them from that, and you're sitting there where you're thinking, well, this evening, what do I do? And if you think to yourself, well, I could just spend all evening running dungeons, and then you work out how much artifact power you'll get from it and thinking, it's not actually that much, then that will be a pretty good system, because what it'll mean is people won't necessarily do that. Some people will do it. Again, some people will do it. But for the majority of even mythic raiders, I hope, and I think maybe Blizzard hope, that it won't be the case. So anyway, that's where I see the problems are, that's where Blizzard see the problems are, and that's where Blizzard are intending their solutions to come from. In theory, I can support these solutions. I think they will work. My only real main criticism is that it should have been obvious right from the start. In fact, this thing was discussed before Legion ever launched and was not tackled. But it is what it is. There's no point in going on about it. They are taking steps to improve it. It does sound like it would improve the situation as well. I'm very positive about that. If it's done right, I don't know the nitty-gritty of it because it's not yet, as far as I know, up on the PTR, and I've not even been able to spend much time on the PTR. I'm hoping to spend a little bit this week. So we'll just have to see where it goes. I hope you found this interesting as always. If you have, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share. And I think tomorrow I'll be doing another little similar video to this, but on legendaries again. So I'll see you then.